Hello, friends. Welcome back to Out of Patience. In science, progress isn't just slowed by what we don't know. It's strangled by systemic barriers built on bias, bureaucracy, and buried history. Then there are the gates that guard access, diminish diversity, and dampen discovery. So, when barriers need breaking, we send in Oliver Bogler. Here is the latest dispatch from Season 2 of Standard Deviation. Take it away, Oliver.
We like to assume that science is a meritocracy, that the best data always wins. But today, we're meeting two scientists who know that isn't true. They know because for years, they were the ones deciding who won. There's a hidden side to science that's rarely talked about. Great data isn't always enough. What matters is whether your discovery is understood and whether it's framed in a way that people will immediately care about it. In the labs that publish in the best places, people absorb that playbook by osmosis. But if you're not in that environment, you can do extraordinary work and get filtered out before it's ever seen. Today on the show, Scientific Publishing, we look at the multi-billion-dollar engine that shapes what gets visibility, credibility, and career reward in science, and what happens when the people trained to run that black box decide to open it. I'm Oliver Bogler, supporting scientists and telling their stories. Here is the reality. A great discovery doesn't just speak for itself. It has to be told. And how it gets told can make the difference between a breakthrough rapidly benefiting the public or that same discovery lingering in a digital desk drawer forever. Navigating the system requires learning a set of unwritten rules, a hidden curriculum dictated by 5 massive publishing houses with profit margins higher than Google's. If you don't know the code, you don't get published where it matters.
There's a disconnect between scientists and the publishers. So a scientist's motivation is for discovery and moving science forward. And to put it bluntly, the publisher's motivation is to make a profit.
This is Dr. Angela Andersen, a former editor at a scientific journal.
So the scientist completes their research and writes a manuscript, and the manuscript is submitted to a journal. At the journal, there's a editorial team that will consider whether to send that paper out for review. It's given to a single editor on that team to make that decision.
Angela was an editor at Cell, one of a handful of ultra-prestigious scientific journals. A paper in Cell or Science or Nature can make your career. Angela wasn't just observing the system, she was the one saying no.
If it is sent out for review, then it's usually reviewed by 2 to 3 scientists, volunteers in the scientific community.
Peer review is essential, and if you were building a business, this would be the dream. You get your raw materials, the manuscripts, for free. You get your quality control for free. And then?
Libraries have to make a subscription to that journal and pay for access for all of the contents of the journal.
Dr. Brandi Mattson is a neuroscientist who served as an editor at Neuron, Cell's brainy sibling. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not a scientist. Why do I care if publishing is a billion-dollar business imposing a lot of barriers on science?
As a member of the public, I care because my taxpayer dollars go to scientists to support their research. And in turn, it doesn't only go to their research, but it goes to paying publishers. These are huge for-profit companies. And so my dollars I've thought of it as being funneled through scientists to the scientific publisher. And then it doesn't go back into science. It goes into profits for these publishers.
The public should care not where the science is published, but that the science is published. Because if the science is published, errors can be caught, good findings can be replicated and validated.
And just like newspapers, scientific journals are not created equal.
If you've ever heard of a public chieftain, oh my God. But you may have heard of the New York Times.
And as a scientist, getting published in that top journal in your field is worth a lot to you, in terms of recognition and all the career advantages that go with it. And the journals have their own goals. To remain at the top, they have to find and publish the best science. What that is not always easy to define.
I mean, our tagline was always a conceptual advance of broad interest. So that could be therapeutic potential. It could be a new mechanism underlying some process in biology. You know, a lot of these top journals are seeking future Nobel Prize winning papers.
As an aside, there are plenty of Nobel discoveries that didn't get into top journals. You can readily find the rejection letters online.
You can't predict which scientific findings are going to give the most change to make patient cures and to help drive science forward.
So, when you combine the intense pressure to get into a top journal, the lack of precision in the selection process, and the misaligned economic and career incentives, you end up with a system littered with barriers. And barriers create inequities. Imagine two scientists. One is surrounded by peers publishing in top journals, down the hall from a Nobel Prize winner, and down the street from Cell Press. She knows exactly how to pitch her paper to get an editor's attention. The other is in a small department without access to mentorship, editing support, or insider guidance. He has the same data, but he doesn't know the code or have the right connections. And because he doesn't know the code, his paper isn't reviewed, let alone accepted, at a top journal.
If you've published well, it sets you up to continue publishing well. It sets you up with good networks. It sets you up potentially to review for the journals that decide ultimately what gets published. And so it can create kind of a small community, exclusive community. And that's problematic if you want to give equal opportunity for everything and everyone to succeed. It might direct science down a certain line that maybe isn't the best line and the most equitable or inclusive line, or even the most scientifically successful line.
Belonging to that exclusive group doesn't only affect where you publish, it can affect the science you get to do in the first place.
These larger breakthrough types of science or scientific findings, they're coming from groups, from multiple labs, from giant team science, as the research and infrastructure needed to make these breakthroughs are almost too large for a single lab to afford and to be able to use. If you're not in the in crowd, then you can still do science, but you have a longer path. One of my mentees many years ago from a small town in Mississippi, and he got his PhD there at the university. He networked and switched fields, and he is now a rising star at Stanford University. So can it be done? Yeah.
But it is harder and riskier, and if you do succeed, it takes longer. You have the science chops and the data, but you don't have the code.
Early in my editorial career, I was starting to receive these findings and these papers, and they were from labs and places that I've never heard of. But mainly I sat there reading it and saying, this is really cool data. I'm looking at the graphs, I look at the figures, and I'm like, I can't understand it.
I think for me, it wasn't so much that I saw a paper and thought, this has great potential, if only it was written differently. It was more that I didn't see the potential. And at the end of the day, what I found really disheartening was that there were so many scientists that had put years and years of effort into research, and they hit submit, and I spent an hour on it, and I reject it. Thinking back to when I was a scientist, how demoralizing that would feel, and to feel like you weren't understood.
And Angela, Brandi, and their colleagues are doing something about it.
I just wanted to ensure that when things are submitted, that it's given its best shot, and then, yes, this one person that's in charge of making that decision will understand it and will see the appeal of it. So that was why I founded Life Science Editors and also the foundation. Well, it was in 2020 during the pandemic. I had always thought about starting this nonprofit because my partner at Life Science Editors, Helen, and I always thought there are people who would benefit from our services that either don't know about us or can't afford us or shouldn't have to pay for us.
The initial focus was on women whose carefully choreographed lives, juggling science careers, family, and 1,000 other obligations, were suddenly upended. But soon it became clear that the need went well beyond this group. 2020 made inequities impossible to ignore. Inequities across caregiving burdens, race, geography, and institutional resources.
And also in 2020 was when George Floyd was murdered, and it just became very clear to me that, again, certain demographics face these uneven, horrible obstacles that aren't acknowledged. And I wanted to create something to sort of level the playing field.
So Angela, Brandi, and their colleagues decided to cross the aisle. They knew that high-impact papers aren't just about science, they're about storytelling. And they knew all about the hidden curriculum that not everyone has access to, unless you have an insider.
And so when you're writing a broad interest paper or a grant proposal, you have to do two things, and that is garner excitement, but also garner credibility and trust.
You need to balance plain speaking to tell your story well and including enough details to signal that you know your stuff.
It can be a pretty tricky needle to thread.
Teaching this important lesson was a radical shift. Imagine the person who usually says no to you sitting down and spending 10 hours of their own time helping you get to a yes by sharing their hard-won knowledge.
To me, you learn from practice and from actually getting rejected and looking at those reviews really carefully. If you've had a grant proposal that's rejected or a paper that's rejected, taking those reviews and considering them carefully and discussing them, not just with your lab, but with your colleagues and with us to get a real objective take on it. That's how you learn it, through practice and pain and trying again.
What can often happen, especially with disadvantaged scientists that are not in the in crowd, is you get a rejection and you don't get any feedback of how to improve your science, how to improve your storytelling and communication and presentation of your science. What we can do, and even through the JEDI Award, is to take a fresh appeal and kind of give them a review from our perspective that they may not have had, and walk through this process of learning to build a thick skin and learn how to view your science through a different lens.
That's exactly right. I would consider us like a dress rehearsal.
So what is the JEDI program exactly?
I can't remember who named it. Might have been me, because I'm a fan of Star Wars. It stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And what it offers is free editorial feedback, or essentially scientific consulting from an expert volunteer, someone who was a former journal editor or grant specialist or is a successful scientist. We give feedback on short grant proposals, manuscripts that are ready for submission, or also job applications. And so it provides 10 hours of editorial time.
At its core, the JEDI program is about justice and access to mentorship at key transitions. Last year, 25 JEDI awards were given. We'll meet some of the recipients in future episodes and hear their stories. Now that you've met Angela and Brandi, it won't surprise you that the JEDI program is more than just editing.
One of our JEDI awardees that I helped, he is a postdoc. His grant got canceled. His funding got pulled. We worked on it to get him funded, and he was able to use those skills to apply for multiple other grants through foundations and whatnot and be able to succeed. Kids, helping them learn regardless of their institutional resources, helped me to guide our awardees and fellows through develop the skills that can last a lifetime.
I can think of one person that I helped who's on our board right now, Crystal Rogers. So we don't only help with publications, but we help with grant proposals. And she had a few applications that weren't funded. And I helped her with an NSF Career Award that was funded. If you're a new scientist, if you don't have a huge network, then you can be seeing a lot more rejections than positive feedback, than acceptances. And it can be incredibly demoralizing. So part of what we do is not just help people with their writing and with their pitch, but also just giving them some moral support.
One day, JEDI may no longer be needed. That would be when
fair and transparent evaluation is default, access to mentorship is universal, and resource gaps are eliminated at key transition points in careers.
What it would look like is that we have a collaborative environment without any hidden curriculum, that everybody is supportive of one another and recognizes that we're all on the same team.
But for now, the playing field remains uneven. In our next episodes, we're going to meet the scientists themselves, the people trying to navigate that playing field, and hear how JEDI is making a difference. This is Oliver Bogler with Standard Deviation on the Out of Patience podcast network. Production of this episode was supported by the Life Science Editors Foundation.